Please be seated. Good morning. I am excited for the opportunity to be here as your partner in caring for the students at the University of Washington. It's been fun over the past couple of years to learn more about the Episcopal Church because I am a Lutheran. And I just knew that, a while ago we decided to have communion together and a bunch of Lutherans got mad. Didn't really know much. And a few weeks ago, I said to Shelley, I haven't preached in a while, and I know you're really busy, so do you want me to preach some Sunday? And she said, yeah, what about the 21st? I said, great. And then I read the scriptures for that day and really wished that I had done that before I agreed. A lesson that I have learned many times now and yet not at all. The reason that I wished I had read the scriptures first, 1 Peter. 1 Peter is often a book that we would rather not deal with, particularly women preachers, for there are some things Peter has to say about women that we would just rather forget. They are difficult and they are complicated, and a lot of Peter's writings are hard. And when I looked and saw that this was the reading, I did not know what to do. Because I find so much of the way that this section of 1 Peter is used to be so incredibly harmful to so many people. There is a student who hangs out with our ministry when we are on campus, but will never, ever come through our doors. Because when she was young and her mother died, people told her it was God's will. And she could not fathom how a loving God would take her mother from her, would remove a mother from her child. And so she will not come to us to encounter the grace that we offer because of the hurt that has been done to her in the past. In our ministry, we work with a lot of students who struggle deeply with anxiety, with depression, with OCD. There are a lot of students in our ministry who have mental illness. Every year, I have at least one student who is sexually assaulted that we work with through the trauma, with actual licensed help as well. And this segment about suffering being God's will is so incredibly harmful to people who are suffering through no fault of their own, to people who are suffering with physical or mental illness, to people who are victims of violence. The question that comes out of this is, what kind of God would will this to be done for me, to me, within me? Who is this God whose will it is that I should have been assaulted? Whose will it is that my brain chemistry is such that I struggle each and every day to get dressed? As we in campus ministry and in life walk with people who are suffering, the idea that it is God's will for so many causes them to question who this God is. Because what kind of loving God would do this to me? Now, I understand that for some, the idea that it is God's will is comforting. And while I do not wish to take from people something in which they find comfort, I do wish to make clear the harm that can come from saying your suffering is God's will, and your suffering will make you stronger. Those are things we often say when we don't know what else to say. Telling somebody that their suffering will make them stronger is often a well-meaning attempt to say, it will get better. You'll come out of this. But if the way we are to be made stronger in life is God causes bad things to happen to us, what does that say about who God is? For me, this idea of redemptive suffering is violence. I read an article just a couple days ago that talked about how staying in a broken marriage, in an abusive marriage, is one of the ways that God strengthens us through suffering. As somebody who was in an emotionally abusive marriage, I can speak to how incredibly unhelpful statements like that are. I have watched friends and loved ones stay in relationships that were incredibly harmful because they felt as though they were called to suffer for God within that marriage. So I guess this comes around to the question, why is there suffering? If God doesn't do it, why does it exist? And I will overgeneralize a little bit to say that there are two kinds of suffering. There is the kind of suffering that seems random, violence, random acts of violence, illness, mental illness, those things that happen in our lives that are so deeply painful, which we could not see coming and for which we cannot see a cause. And then there is the suffering that happens because we have said that we are choosing a difficult path because we follow Jesus Christ. We have chosen to love. We have chosen to give up comforts. We have chosen to work against powers and principalities because of who we are as Christians. And that is what I believe the suffering Peter is talking about here. Peter is talking to people who are Christian, who are living in the diaspora, people who are living in an empire that does not see Christianity as a good, that does not want to hear the message of Jesus Christ. And because they insist on continuing to believe and they insist on continuing to live a Christian way, they face suffering. This is incredibly different from the suffering that we face because we are sick, because things have been done to us, and the suffering that we face because we happen to be born in a certain skin color or with a certain sexual orientation, or the suffering we face because our body does not match who we feel we are inside. Those are different types of suffering. And yet this segment of the Bible, these verses from 1 Peter, are used as a blanket for all those forms of suffering. For so long, oppressed peoples have been told they should just continue suffering because it is God's will. It is God's will that they suffer. It is God's will that they are in slavery. It is God's will that they are poor. It is God's will that they are oppressed, that they don't have enough food. This is not the God that I worship. The God that I worship, that we worship, is a God of love, is a God who came to this earth to live among us and to know what life is like, to become embodied and experience what it really means to be human. This section from 1 Peter also brings up the question, well, why did Jesus die? And that may really determine how you interpret these verses. For if you believe that Christ's purpose in coming to this earth was to suffer and die because humans were so awful, the only way that we could be redeemed was for God to kill his own son on the cross through horrible suffering, you might believe that it is all of our calls to suffer because Christ suffered. If you believe that God became embodied as man and walked this earth and taught love and spoke against empire and spoke against power and presented us with a radical reorientation of our systems, and was killed because he did that. And that God knew that sending somebody to earth with such a radical message would land him dead. Then we look at the cross in a different way. We look at the cross in the way that Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me. That suffering that we are called to is the suffering that we enter into when we say, I am going to follow Jesus Christ. I am going to give up what I have and who I am to follow him. That is a very different kind of suffering than the suffering faced when a mother's child is shot by the police because he is black. And then that same mother watches as police officers are let go, are not found guilty of this crime. That is a suffering that is caused by empire, not by God. That is a suffering that is caused by our collective sin, by our collective broken nature, by our continual denial of the cross, by our continual denial of this radical reorientation that Christ calls us to, of this radical love for neighbor to which we are called. That is the kind of suffering that comes about because of sin. God does not cause suffering so that we might be redeemed. God does not cause suffering so that we might be stronger. God does not randomly pick off people in this world for God's own reasons so that there might be another angel in heaven. That is not how God works. God does not torture us so that we come out better people in the end. What God does so that we might be stronger, so that we might be people of love and of commitment, is give us the Holy Spirit, is give us the example of Jesus Christ and his radical love for all people and his willingness to cross boundaries and to speak truth to power. We were given that example so that we might be stronger, so that we might persist. In today's gospel, we hear about being left with the Holy Spirit, this Spirit that walks with us and sustains us when we are suffering. God is deeply present with us in our suffering through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit walks with us as we suffer. We hear the voice of the Holy Spirit in prayer. We hear it in our gut, and we see it in the faces of people around us who come and care for us in our times of need. The call of the Holy Spirit is to be present with people who are suffering, to be present with people who are struggling with mental illness, to be present with those who are suffering at the hands of our government, at the hands of the choices that we collectively have made as a people. The Holy Spirit is with us to inspire us and move us so that we may not only be present in the lives of those who are suffering, but so that we might work to create change so that there is less suffering. But when we are sitting with people who are struggling deeply with mental illness, who are struggling deeply with physical illness, who are victims of oppression, we are not called to respond that this suffering is God's will, that this will make them stronger. I have actually watched as people who are in the midst of suffering react almost violently to the idea that this will make them stronger. What we are called to do is to let the Spirit rest in us and surround us that we might love those who are suffering. And that when we are in our own suffering, we know that the Spirit is with us. We have faith and trust in the idea that God still dwells within and among us through the power of the Holy Spirit. That this God who loved us so deeply that he came to earth to live within a human body, to challenge the powers of his day to preach love and acceptance, and ended up dying for that, ended up experiencing death as we experience death. That ever-loving God is with us in our suffering, is with us in our difficulties, not because God has called us to that suffering, not because God, excuse me, not because God is a chess player moving all the pieces around, causing things to happen, but because God is love. And God calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves, to pick up our cross and follow him, to suffer willingly for the sake of our neighbor, to dwell in that love that is Jesus Christ, and to dwell in the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.